Hello and welcome everyone to Intrepid Museum's live virtual programming. Thank you so much for joining us today for Star Stories. We are so happy that you're tuning in, and we'll be answering a number of your questions throughout the program. So my name is Alicia, and I'm an educator at the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum in New York City. I will be your host for today for the program. And just as a reminder, the museum's live streams are free. And if you'd like to support us in supporting this exciting new content, please do click on the link in the comments or in the description. So again, feel free to use the chat today to say hello. Let us know where you're tuning in from or if you've ever been to the Intrepid before. And of course, if you have any questions, you can put them there too. So today we are going to be talking a little bit about the Intrepid's connection to space. So why we are a space museum. And then we are going to talk about the stars and a few constellations that we can find up in the night sky, and also how the stars have been able to help guide people for generations. You see, a long time ago, we didn't really know much about our world other than what we could see immediately around us. And it wasn't until we started going up into the sky and then also further into outer space and the rest of our solar system that we really were able to get a sense of our planet. And it all just started by looking up. So let's go ahead and get started. So to kick us off, everyone, I will start off by introducing you to our ship. This right here is the Intrepid Museum. So it is actually inside of the former USS Intrepid, which was built in 1943 and served in 3 wars: World War II, the Cold War, and the Vietnam War. It was retired in 1974 and then eventually in 1982 became the museum that we all know and love, the Intrepid Museum. So we are actually currently docked right off the shoreline of Manhattan in the Hudson River. So if you've ever driven by on the West Side Highway there and seen that huge ship over there, that's us. Come by and see us. Now, if you're local, maybe you have visited before, or maybe you've passed along the way too. It is a really beautiful thing to see outside. It is, again, massive. It's really hard to miss. But inside is where a lot of the magic is, we like to say. A lot of where our cool artifacts are. Like, for instance, this one on the right. So this is one of the 4 propellers of the Intrepid, one of the things that help to move us through the water. And that, of course, is why we are a sea museum, because we are a naval ship out at sea during times of conflict, or we were anyway. And in this image on the left, you can see the ship racing along there through the water while in service. Now, at the Intrepid, you are also going to see a number of planes. That is one of the things that we are known for. And because we carried planes, we also had a very special name. So can anyone in the chat tell me, if you happen to know, what kind of a ship we are? What are ships like the Intrepid called? Those that have airplanes on them and inside of them? What is a ship that carries aircraft? Well, here are a couple that we have. The Avenger, that big blue one on the left there, it's from World War II. That was a torpedo bomber, so you can actually see that big long torpedo underneath it. And the white one on the right is the Fury, which is a jet plane. It flew really, really, really fast during the Cold War. So planes like these are, of course, why we are an air museum. And, you know, the Intrepid could actually fit up to about 100 planes inside at a time. It could launch and also land these planes from the flight deck. So we like to say it was kind of like a floating airport. So our ship is called, if you happen to get this one, an aircraft carrier because, again, it carried aircraft across the ocean. But, you know, we got a sea museum here. We got our air museum. But that space part, it still really confuses people. Why are we also a space museum? Well, take a look at this. Can anyone tell me what this thing is? All right, so we are looking at this big, black, almost light bulb or flashlight shaped thing. You see it says United States on the side of it. It's got the United States flag under it. Some people even say it kind of looks like an ice cream cone tilted on its side, or maybe a megaphone that you talk into and get nice and loud. So this is something called a space capsule. And it's a very, very special piece of spacecraft because this is how astronauts used to go into space. Now, looking at it, everyone, you can probably see it's not very big, right? Maybe you can tell me in the chat even how many people do you think could fit inside of this capsule? What do you think? How many full-grown people could fit in there? And I don't mean, cramming them all in. I mean, like, comfortably. How many were meant to go in this capsule? Because capsules like these rode on the tippy top of a rocket. Now, a rocket, of course, is that thing that goes way up into space. There's lots of fire and things that come out of the bottom from the fuel, right? But then once they get into space, those capsules separate from the top of the rocket, and then they are up there floating around the Earth usually, and then they can complete their missions. So a while ago in the 1960s, during this Cold War era, NASA, our space program, was part of something called a space race with the Soviet Union. And of course, if you've ever been in a race before, there's always a finish line or a goal, right? So in the space race, the goal was to get all the way to the moon. But of course, you don't just roll out of bed and end up on the moon. We had to take a number of other baby steps to get there first. So we had to think about things like, how to even get up into space, so developing those rockets. And then, of course, how to breathe up there, how to eat and sleep and work for long periods of time. So these capsules were part of some of those early steps, right? And this one in particular was part of something called the Mercury Project, or Project Mercury. This was a Mercury capsule, the Aurora 7. Now here, you can actually see it on the tippy top of a rocket there. It's that black cone, kind of Hershey Kiss type thing on the very top of the rocket there. And yeah, again, very, very small. And if you happen to take that guess in the chat for me, only one person could fit inside of it. And in 1962, this astronaut named Scott Carpenter right here, went up inside of that Mercury capsule, the Aurora 7. And, well, have you ever heard of that word before? Mercury? What is Mercury, right? Why do we think they called these missions the Mercury missions or the Mercury program? So Scott Carpenter, in this one, again, very early on, he went up into space. He orbited around a few times. He splashed down into the water. He was doing some experiments, but again, this was the early stages of our NASA missions to get to the moon. So this name, Mercury, came about. Maybe you've heard of it before. It's the name of one of our planets in the solar system, of course. Now, it and many other planets got their names from Roman mythology. So Mercury was the name of their messenger god. He was kind of like their mailman, you could say. And he was known for being really, really fast. And oftentimes, you will actually even see him depicted like this. So you can see those wings on his helmet there, and he's got wings on his shoes and on his staff there. So all of those wings put together supposedly make him go really, really fast. So the planet Mercury is both the first planet from the sun, and as its name might suggest, it is actually also the fastest planet. So 1 year on Mercury takes only 88 days. While here on Earth, of course, it takes us 365 days to go all the way around the sun. So America wanted to be the first and the fastest to get to the moon. So they thought, yeah, Mercury is an excellent, excellent name for this program. So back to the Aurora 7 and Scott Carpenter. At this time in the space program, when capsules came back home, they wanted to pick a softer landing spot. So they would splash down into the water with parachutes to slow them down. And then, of course, afterwards, since they were, just out there floating around in the middle of the ocean, someone would have to go pick them up. So a helicopter would come to rescue the astronaut. And in this case, Scott Carpenter was picked up after being flown to safety. So this was the way that we used our capsules for many, many missions, all the way through Apollo, which you can actually see in this picture on the left here, which was the one that got all the way to the moon. So they'd splash down into the water, a nice softer landing spot, and pretty easy to aim for since 70% of the Earth is covered in water. Now, after it splashed down, the divers would help to retrieve the capsule. They would bring it on board the closest ship to then eventually, end up in a museum. But the Intrepid was really lucky because it got to do this on not one, but 2 space missions. And it actually played a really important role in picking up astronauts and their capsules after they returned from space. And so you can see in these pictures here, this is us retrieving a Gemini capsule, the Gemini 3 capsule. And you can see all the sailors lined up along the side here. So excited to see this capsule getting picked up. So excited to be a part of history and to see the astronauts get out of that capsule there. So this actually then is why we are a space museum. We have this really wonderful connection to being able to pick up these space capsules, to being able to pick up these astronauts. And in fact, here is Scott Carpenter on board the ship right after he was picked up. He's there in his Mercury space suit. It's all shiny and silver, surrounded by officers and onlookers while he's on board the Intrepid after being picked up in 1962. So a very, very special occasion. Now, as I kind of mentioned before, after the Mercury missions and after Scott Carpenter, NASA sent up some other astronauts. And those other astronauts you can see here, Gus Grissom and John Young. And they went up inside of that Gemini 3 capsule. And similarly, when they were done, again, they also splashed down into the water, as you saw in those pictures, and they were retrieved by the Intrepid in the very same way. But I want to talk a little bit about the names of those missions for a second, too, and in particular, the Gemini missions. So what does Gemini mean? Tell me in the chat if you know. Take a look at these pictures and think a little bit about why it might be different than the Mercury missions that came before it. Thinking about maybe who's inside of it there. And also remembering, of course, the fact that this is called Project Gemini. So where have we heard that word before? Tell me in the chat if you know. Project Gemini. Has anyone ever heard the word Gemini? What does that mean? What is Gemini? Are you a Gemini? Where have we heard that before? Or what might that represent? So everyone, here are those two guys again, Gus Grissom and John Young. And if you guessed constellation, you would be right, or a zodiac sign, right? Now, what is a constellation? Well, it's basically a picture in the sky that's made up of a grouping of stars. Now, you see, a long time ago, people would actually connect the dots in the sky of the stars to make things, to make pictures, right? And they would tell stories about what they saw. So if you take a look at the Gemini constellation on the right, what does that kind of look like to you? That line drawing there. And maybe also thinking about the picture next to it of those two guys. So that picture there, that picture in the stars, that constellation is of the twins. So yeah, thinking about that and thinking, of course, about our friends Gus and John here who went up into space together, now maybe we can understand why we called this the Gemini Project, because it was the first time that NASA sent two astronauts up into space together. So there you go. That has a lot to do with our space programs and why we are connected, and of course, why we're a space museum. This is a wonderful jumping off point to get to the stars. But before we do, I want to pause here and see if we have any questions to start off about Intrepid or about any of our early missions into space. So any questions at all? Were any other NASA programs named after Greek mythology? Yeah, so pretty much all of them, actually. You've got Mercury and Gemini, of course. Then you've got Apollo, which took us to the moon. So that's actually kind of ironic because he's actually the sun god. But they really like the idea of him, pulling his chariot of fire across the sky, kind of like our powerful rockets, again, all the flames coming out of that. And really just kind of what it represented for the mission. So that was the Apollo. And now looking ahead, of course, we've got the Artemis missions coming up. Artemis was the twin sister to Apollo, which again is very symbolic because it's the name of the missions that we're going to be bringing the next man and the first woman back to the moon. So it is actually quite interesting and kind of funny too. Project Mercury was originally supposed to be called Project Astronaut. Doesn't quite have the same ring to it, does it? But remember, this was even before we had the term astronaut. They actually got the word astronaut from the naming tradition that started off with Greek mythology and the Argonauts. So maybe you've heard of the ship, the Argo, that sailed around Jason and the Argonauts, right? Searching for the golden fleece. So this naut term, there's nautical, right? Like a boat. So then it kind of, carried on. We had aeronauts, who were people who pioneered flying hot air balloons and things like that. But then they realized, they didn't really want to make it all about the people doing it. They didn't want to make it about the astronauts going up into space so much as the whole idea of the mission. So they decided to go with Mercury instead, which focused a little bit more on the goal, right? But we've also, of course, got rockets that are named after mythology of things like Thor. Maybe you recognize that if you're, a fan of superheroes. We had Atlas and Centaur and Saturn. And then, of course, a spacecraft like Aquarius, which was a lunar module that ended up being a lifeboat for Apollo 13, or Orion, which is the part of the newest series of capsules that we're using with NASA. So they just started and they kept going. So great question. Lots and lots of mythology up there in space. All right, any other questions? How many constellations are there? So there are 88 officially recognized constellations in the night sky. Again, those are those groupings of stars that look like pictures. And of those 88, 52 of them are visible to us in the northern hemisphere. So, for example, here in New York City, we can see 52 of them. The rest of them you can see in the southern hemisphere. So that would be if you're living down, in South America or somewhere southern, south of the equator. So the constellations that we recognize, again, are originally described by the ancient Greeks and Romans, and they correspond to their mythology. But they, of course, are not the only civilization to find pictures in the sky. They're just the ones that are the most widely recognized today. So there's many, many well-known ones like Ursa Major, which is the Great Bear, and Orion, the Hunter, and of course the zodiac signs, which you talked a little bit about. But then there's also some really random ones like a unicorn, and a giraffe, and even a microscope, all sorts of things up there. So really, really interesting stories. And I'm going to tell you a couple of them actually in just a second. So everyone, we can actually find the Gemini constellation in our night sky. And I actually am going to show you this. Now, we have a program called Stellarium. It is a free program that you can download or use on the internet as well. And it will allow me to show you what the sky looks like right now. And I know that might be a little bit weird. You might be like, well, why would I want to see what the sky looks like right now? I can just look out my window and it's going to look like, a blue sky. Well, I'm not going to be able to see any stars. What's the point of that? Well, with this program, I can actually turn off there we go. I can actually turn off the atmosphere. So if we look, everyone, at this right now, what you are seeing here is a blue sky, right? Not very exciting. But this is what it would look like in New York City. All right. So I know, again, you might be like, that doesn't make any sense. There's no buildings. That's not New York City. But let's just imagine. Imagine we're in Central Park. We're lying in the grass. It's a nice sunny day. It's not very sunny here in New York City, unfortunately, right now. But let's use our imaginations. So we're lying here at somewhere grassy. All right. We're looking up at the blue sky. Now, let me ask you this to start off. When we are looking up at the sky here, again, we are not seeing any stars, although technically the sun is a star. So, all right, maybe that. But the reason, again, we have this blue sky is because of the atmosphere that is clouding our view. But my friends, have you ever wondered why specifically the sky is blue? Because many people throughout history have wondered this. They think, all right, is it because so much of our Earth is covered in the ocean, and so maybe it's reflecting up there in the clouds somehow? Or maybe there is actually an ocean up in the sky, and that's why it rains. Some of it's leaking down. No. Okay, so the real reason why the sky is blue, again, because of our atmosphere, this bubble that protects the Earth, it's kind of like an eggshell. You can imagine it like an eggshell going around us. It keeps all of our oxygen in, it keeps our air pressure in, and it also helps to keep stray rocks and meteors and things away from us. It helps to break it up as they come in. Also, it helps to protect us from any charged particles that are coming in from the sun, but also when the sun's light is coming in, it scatters the blue light spectrum from the sun really well. So it basically takes all the blue light from the sun's white light and it smears it all around the sky. And that is why we can't see stars during the day. So although the atmosphere does us a lot of really good, helpful things to keep us alive, it doesn't really do a lot for helping us see the stars. But technically, again, we have one big star in the sky. We can see our own special star, the sun. But it is so bright that it does mess with our view of the rest of the stars during the day because of that scattered light too. But what's really neat is in this program, I can actually remove the atmosphere for us. So the stars are always there. They are just hidden until the sun goes down. And so there we go. We can see the stars. Now, when throughout history people have looked up in the sky, they've noticed, just like you might be seeing now, it just kind of looks like a bunch of white dots, right? A bunch of dots on a black piece of paper, maybe. In fact, Native Americans in the Pacific Northwest believed that at one point, the sky was nothing but darkness. And so they actually sent a young member of their tribe to go make a mask out of wood, and he set it on fire and then traveled across the sky to light it up. So effectively, he became the sun. And then at night, all of the stars were actually sparks and embers that flew out of his mask and burned holes into that big piece of paper or big piece of fabric there. So many cultures then started to notice also that the stars were always very consistent and their patterns always stayed the same in the sky, even though they might move slightly. And so they realized this and eventually began to map out the sky. And they identified all of these different groupings of stars. Now, remember before, I told you that Gemini, I showed you that picture and the lines were all drawn out and connected. As you can see here, there are no lines in our sky. In fact, there's not actually even words in the sky. This is just showing you in the program. But of course, we have to use our imaginations to see them. And now what's really neat about this program is I can actually add those lines to it for you. And there we go. We can actually see a bunch of those constellations that are all drawn out. And believe it or not, if we look up into the sky in the east, up here, we can see Castor and Pollux right here, which are the names of the twin brothers. So you can see that stick figure there drawn together. And even cooler, actually, I can add artwork as well. So there we go. We can see very clearly here Castor and Pollux, the twin brothers, up in the night sky. So again, the ancient Greeks saw these groupings of stars. They decided to come up with stories with them to help teach lessons and to remember important stories about their gods and things that were important to them. So the story about Gemini goes like this. They said, once upon a time, there were two boys, Castor and Pollux, and they were best of friends. So Castor's dad was a regular guy, but Pollux's dad was Zeus, the king of the gods, which meant that Pollux was going to be able to live forever. He was basically a god too. But that didn't bother them. They did everything together. They played together. They went to school together. And you never saw one of them without each other. So maybe you have a best friend just like that and you hang out with them all the time too. So you can relate. And then when they got older, they both became great warriors together. But one day, a war broke out in their country. So Castor and Pollux went to go fight in the war together. But something really sad happened. Castor was killed in battle. So his brother, Pollux, was absolutely heartbroken because, of course, his best friend was gone. So Pollux went to his dad, Zeus, and he said, I know I am supposed to live forever, but I really, really miss my twin brother, my best friend. Could you let me give half of my forever life to my brother so that I could be with him longer? And Zeus was so touched by this that his son was willing to give up half of his life for his brother that he did something even better. He brought back Castor and let them both live for half of forever. And then when that was up, he put the two brothers up in the night sky so that they would never have to worry about being separated ever again. So Gemini, everyone, is a constellation again. So again, this is a wonderful story that the Greeks could tell to remind them of friendship, to remind them of brotherly love, and to care for one another. So every time people could go up or look up into the sky and see those two figures together, that's what they would think of. Now, can you think of any other constellations? Maybe if you know any, you can put them in the chat for me. Maybe if you happen to know your zodiac sign, which of course is based on the time of year that you were born, that's also a constellation. So, for example, I am a Taurus. My birthday is April 30th. Gemini season, actually, I think just wrapped up, I believe, in May usually. So that is where Gemini was, the sun passing through its path through the zodiac signs or those constellations. That's called the ecliptic. And so depending on where the sun was along that pathway when you were born, what month you were born in, that has to do with what your zodiac sign is. And of course, they say that has to do with certain personality traits that you may or may not have. Now, another star grouping that a lot of people have heard of is something called the Big Dipper. All right, the Big Dipper. Let me know in the chat if you've ever heard of the Big Dipper before. And let me know also, everyone, is the Big Dipper a constellation? What do you think? Is the Big Dipper a constellation? Yes or no? Here it is right here. You'll see the Big Dipper. You kind of turn your head on the side there. It looks like a big spoon, right, on its side. So the Big Dipper, everyone, is actually not a constellation. It is something called an asterism. That is a smaller, recognizable part of a larger constellation. So the Big Dipper right here is actually, as you can see, the back half of a larger constellation called Ursa Major. Ursa Major, the Great Bear right here. So the Big Dipper is actually very, very helpful. It's easy to find, a lot of bright stars in the sky, but also it's very, very helpful for people who might be traveling. All right. So the reason for that is because of this. If you find the Big Dipper, again, it's kind of on its side or upside down here. If you look at these two bright stars right here on the front half of like the bowl of the ladle, let's say, if you follow those stars, you go 1, jump to here, 2, and then you take a big jump all the way here. This star right here is very, very special and important. This star is called Polaris. And you'll notice also it is the tip of the tail of this smaller constellation here, Ursa Minor, which is the little bear. So maybe these bears are related here. But this star in particular is really, really, really special and important, especially, as I said, for sailors who, let's say you're out in the middle of the ocean, it's very dark, you don't have any land to tell where you're going, you're all turned around, you're in a ship and it's a storm and it's dark, you don't know what's going on. This star in particular is helpful. This is a very, very bright star. This is what we also call the North Star. All right. So these ancient navigators would always be able to find this star because it was always fixed in the north. And you can see there is that letter N here. That is our cardinal direction north. They would always know which direction they were going, north, east, south, or west, based on following that particular star. And what's really cool about this particular star, everyone, is if I fast forward time a little bit, you'll notice that it really is fixed. You can see all the other things, all the other pictures moving around it. But that one star, if you keep your eye on it, it's not moving. So it's a really, really helpful trick for those sailors to be able to have that. Now, there are a number of stories behind Ursa Major, too, the Great Bear. Here is a story that was told by the Iroquois Native American tribes of the Northeast in the United States. So once upon a time, they said there was this great and terrible bear terrorizing the land, and it was eating all of the food. So all of the tribes got together, and they decided that they needed to do something about this bear. So they sent their 3 bravest warriors, who you can see right here, these 3 stars in the back tail of this bear. They sent their 3 bravest warriors to hunt this bear down. So the warriors were really good, but the bear was always one step ahead of them. So they chased this bear through the mountains. They chased him through the oceans, through the deserts. And finally, the warriors started to catch up on the bear. But the bear took a giant running leap, and he jumped into the night sky where the warriors couldn't follow him. But right before he did that, the bravest of the 3 warriors took his bow and arrow, pulled back his arrow, and he shot the bear in his back leg. And they vowed that if that bear ever came back down to earth again, they would be there waiting for him. So to this day, they say that the bear is still hiding up in the sky. And every year he comes close to the earth to see if the warriors are still waiting for him. But the warriors are always tipped off. They always know when he's close to the earth because a little bit of the blood from his injury of his back leg drips down onto the trees and changes the leaves' colors. So maybe you can think of a time of year when those leaves change colors, maybe from green to kind of a reddish or orangish color there. This was a great way for them to explain the seasons. So again, what time of year might that be? The fall, right? Or the autumn. So they said that that was a time when the bear was coming closer to earth. Again, the blood dripping down onto the leaves, changing them to those pretty colors. Now, what's really, really cool about this is actually we can imagine that this is happening and chart it out here just based on looking at the stars. So if you keep your eye on Ursa Major here, the Great Bear, I'm going to do some timey-wimey things here, and I'm going to play with time and show you what it would look like at different times of the year. All right, so let's imagine, everyone, that it is about 8 o'clock at night. All right, so we're changing it to 8 o'clock at night. This is when, of course, the stars are going to be most prominent. You're going to be able to see them in the sky. So right now it is June 22nd. And in June, of course, it's not the fall, it's the summer. So we see that bear, he is high up over the horizon right there. But if we fast forward through time, now it's July at 8 o'clock, he's a little lower. August, he's getting lower. September, so now the leaves are starting to change, and you can see that back leg is starting to touch the horizon here. October, those leaves are definitely changing around October, and there's that bear. He's down there. He's looking around. He's trying to see if the warriors are there. November, definitely our leaves are still changing. Maybe we're even losing a few now, but his leg is right underneath there. He's skimming through there. But now about December, the leaves are starting to fall. right? So he's going up away again. He realizes those warriors are waiting for him, so he's sneaking away. Now we have January and February. He's climbing back into the sky, March and April and May, and now here we are back at June. So that cycle of Ursa Major going around is what allowed everyone to kind of make sense of the season so they could understand why the leaves were changing color. Now, we talked a little bit about asterisms, right? The Big Dipper is an asterism, a smaller grouping of stars inside of a larger constellation. Well, there is actually another pretty famous asterism in the sky that is very easy to find. If anyone has perhaps ever seen another clumping of stars, let's go back to now-ish time. Another grouping of stars right on over here. Pretty easy to find. And if anyone in the chat wants to give me a guess, it's also named after an article of clothing. All right. Anyone happen to know about that? Something that maybe helps to keep your pants up. You wear it around your pants, around your waist. Anyone know? So everyone, I am, of course, talking about Orion's belt. All right. So that's these 3 stars right here. Very, very bright in the sky and also pretty easy to find because they are right in a line like that. Pretty easy to find there. Orion's belt is an asterism within the constellation of Orion. So Orion has some fun stories too. In Greek mythology, Orion was a great hunter. He was even said to have killed Taurus, the great bull, my zodiac sign, who is right next to him. But he thought, he was the best. He liked to brag a lot about being the best hunter. And of course, we know it's not nice to brag and go around telling people that you're better than them. Well, Orion was friends with Artemis, remember, Apollo's sister, also goddess of the hunt. And she really respected animals. She believed that you should only kill animals if you need them for food or for survival, not just for fun. It's not nice to go around just killing animals. But Orion just kept wanting to show off and do that. So the other gods took note of this. They saw this and they decided to punish Orion by sending a giant scorpion after him named Scorpius. So they fought long and hard, and to this day, that punishment is still standing. They are chasing each other throughout the night sky. But the really interesting thing is you're never going to see the 2 of them out at the same time. They're actually on opposite sides of the sky, with Orion falling in the west on the horizon just as Scorpius rises in the southeast. So they are always chasing each other, and I can show you that too. So keep your eye on Orion here, all right? So I'll fast forward through time here. You're going to see him set. And then as he's going down on the horizon, over here, we are going to see Scorpius the scorpion come on up. So here it comes. He's going down, and as we look back right here, Antares is that big bright star on top of it. There we have Scorpius. And that's actually the same constellation as Maui's fishhook. So if you've ever seen the movie Moana, you can actually see that kind of hook shape right there. That is the hook that the demigod Maui used to pull up the Pacific Islands, like Hawaii in their legends. So that is a famous Polynesian constellation tale. And there's actually another Polynesian tale that's related, we'll go back in time here, to Orion as well. So again, that asterism there of the 3 stars in a line here, that belt, is very noticeable. But in Polynesia, they actually saw something differently. And this story is about a little girl and her baby shark. Don't sing the song. It'll be an earworm forever. So we've got these 3 stars right here. And in Tonga, which is an island named Fiji out in the Pacific, the 3 stars that form Orion's belt tell the story of Hina and her pet shark. So Hina was a beautiful young girl. And one day while her brothers were out fishing, they caught a baby shark. And they gave the shark to Hina as a pet for her birthday. And she created this small pool in the reef that was nearby where she lived, where the shark could live too. And so Hina watched over her pet baby shark. But one evening, there was a big, terrible, violent storm that came, and it blew down a lot of buildings on the island, and it damaged the reef where the shark was living. So the waters rose up, and the shark rose up with it, and it was swept out to sea. And that was the end of the shark. We never saw the shark again. So Hina was devastated. She was so sad. And she begged her parents to take her out to sea to go look for the shark. So she and her parents searched the ocean. They searched high and low until finally they saw a fin come out of the water. And she knew in her heart that was her pet baby shark. although it wasn't a baby anymore. It had gotten a little bigger. So she begged and begged and begged the shark to return home. But the shark had tasted freedom. He loved the ocean. He liked to spread out. And Hina was really upset. She begged and begged, will you please come back with me? But he was like, nah, I'm good out here. I like hanging out in the ocean. I've made some friends. I'm good. So she was very upset. But she prayed and prayed and prayed. She didn't want to be parted from her friend anymore. So the canoe and her parents rose up into the heavens. And now they say that that is these 3 stars. It's the stars that they call Aletulu, or 3 in a boat. So they say that is Hina and her parents up in the sky, staying there with the baby shark. So no matter where you are across the world, you might have seen slightly different constellations, or seen the same constellations, but maybe seen them a little bit differently too. So let's pause here before moving on. I want to see if there are any other questions. Any other questions? Are there other constellation stories about the seasons? Oh, a ton. And actually, I'll pull this back up here for you. So the constellation of Virgo, for instance, is another zodiac sign, right? So Virgo is often depicted as a beautiful maiden, right? There she is in the east. And so she's often recognized in many cultures as the bringer of spring. So the ancient Greeks linked that constellation to their myth about Persephone, who was the goddess of the spring. So if you know that one, Persephone was the daughter of Demeter, who's the goddess of the harvest. So that's when you collect all the food. And one day she was out gathering flowers, and Hades, the god of the underworld, kidnapped her and brought her down to the underworld with him. So her mom, of course, was very, very upset. She stopped working as the goddess of harvest. So the earth turned cold. It died up. All of the plants were dying. And everyone was starting to struggle. And they said, we need the food back. She needs to start working again. So finally, Zeus, the king of the gods, declared, all right, enough of this. Persephone has to be returned. Hades did let her go. But right before doing so, he threw a feast for her. And she ate a few pomegranate seeds. Now, pomegranates are a fruit. If you've had it, they're very good. They actually sell like pomegranate juice too. You can buy in the stores. But they have all these tiny little red seeds inside of it. And it's a very common fruit that comes out around the fall time, actually. So maybe that's beckoning her back down to the underworld in the fall. But she ate a couple of these pomegranate seeds. And as a result, she then had to spend half of the year in the underworld. So they say that when Persephone goes to the underworld each year, her mom is sad, she's mourning, and it's winter time. But then spring comes and she returns to the land. And so the same thing happens with the Virgo constellation here. And I can do the timey-wimey thing for you again. So in June here, let's make it about 8 o'clock again. There we go. So there she is in June, summertime, peak of like harvest time. She's up here. She's with her mom. She is high up in the sky right there. But as we start to move forward in time, July, August, now she's starting to head down. September, you can just see her feet there. October, she's basically gone. Now it's the fall and the winter. And so we don't see her in the sky again until she pops up over here in the east about, February, March time. And there she is again. So again, this is kind of the opposite of the Ursa Major, where the bear's coming down in the fall and the winter. She goes up in the spring and the summer. So great question. I love telling all these stories. Any other questions? Why can't we see many stars in New York City? Yes. So I mentioned that the sun scatters light around the atmosphere. And that happens, during the day. It covers the stars up, right? So the same thing happens here in New York City, right? We have all of these lights in New York City, or any big city, even maybe where you're tuning in from too. When you have a lot of lights, so street lights and cars, or tall buildings and things like that, it's emitting all of this light pollution from the ground up. So all that light gets scattered about too, and it eventually helps to block out the ability to see those stars. But if you ever go camping or, someplace that it's a little bit more out of the way from the lights of the city, you are going to see billions of stars out there. So the darker it is, the less light pollution. You go out in the middle of the desert or something, and it is just phenomenal. Your mind will be blown. So stargazing, again, can be a little tricky here in the city. We can see some stars on clear nights, usually just kind of the brightest ones, of course, but definitely not as many as you'd see out, in the desert or something like that. Great questions, everyone. Now, if you have ever seen the movie Moana, which I'm sure many of you have, When she's out there adventuring in the ocean, you might have seen her use some celestial navigation. So she uses the stars to figure out where she is going. So remember we said Polaris, the North Star, was really great at helping sailors to find their way. Let me pull that one back up there for you. So Polaris, again, does not move. That is our star right here. All right, our North Star. Really great at helping navigators to find their way. Well, they also had a few other tricks up their sleeves to figure out where they were going in the world, and kind of literally because they used their hands. Bad pun, I know. Now, it is certainly not the most precise way of doing things. Eventually, they developed gadgets to help them out, but I'm going to teach you a few things here that you can do with just your hands. So we are going to be looking at something called latitude. If you have ever seen a map, you might notice that sometimes they have lines that go up and down and also side to side. So these are coordinate lines. And I'm going to go ahead and put this back up here because my feet is a little blurry here. All right, so those are coordinate lines that go up and down and left to right, tell you exactly where something is. And especially if you're sailing out in the ocean, right? That is really helpful to know. The equator is the line that goes around the center of the Earth. And we say that that line is at 0 degrees latitude. And then depending on whether you go above or below that line, you are going to be going north or south that many degrees. All right, so degrees is what we're looking for here. Now, the Intrepid used coordinates like this when it was sailing too, but of course they had much fancier gadgets to tell them where they were. The hand thing is just kind of a fun thing that people actually did use long ago, but we have more precise things now. So let's pretend you are outside, you're looking up at the sky, all right? If you extend your arms out at arm's length, just like this, all right, at that relative distance, the width of your pinky finger, all right, is said to be 1 degree. So that's 1 degree up from the horizon if you put that right on the horizon there. And actually, everyone, I will change this if you want to make your screen full screen if you're watching this now. All right. So if you make this full screen, and we are going to zoom in here a little bit, and I'm going to make this kind of look like what your night sky would look like. All right. So if we have about 20 degrees like that. All right. So there we go. All right. So imagine, everyone, you are, lying on the ground here and you put your arms out. 1 degree off the horizon is your pinky finger. Now, the width of your knuckles across your hand is 10 degrees. All right. And so then the span of your whole hand outstretched from thumb to the tip of your fingers is 20. So if I were to go like this off the horizon, that is 20, which is true because if you do 10 and 10, right? So based on those measurements, you can actually count how many degrees up from the horizon the North Star is to determine your latitude. So how far north you are on the planet. So for instance, I'll actually zoom out here a little bit. In New York, all right, the North Star is at 40 degrees. All right, it is 40 degrees north. So you see where it says Polaris right there. So if you are standing there outside, of course, this is a little technical here with the computer, but if you were standing outside, you could figure out that 40-degree point in New York City a couple of ways. So you could, put your arms out. You could do 4 fists up because that would be 40, right? You could also put your hand out fully like this and go like this and have 2 hands up. That would also be 40. Or if you really wanted to, you could stack your pinky 40 times too and kind of see it like that. But theoretically, that is how you would be able to tell where you are. At what latitude point is what point that North Star, again, that doesn't move, is located at. Now, let's say you are not in New York City. Let's say you're a little further south. Let's say you're in Mexico, right? Let's say you're in Mexico City. Well, Alexa, stop. Oh, technology. All right. So imagine, everyone, you are in Mexico City. You are 20 degrees north. All right. So again, you could do the same thing. You could put 2 fists up, or you could do one of these as well. So again, this is how far north you are just based on using your hands and the North Star. But did you know, everyone, people living in the southern hemisphere actually see things a little bit differently. So this is south of the equator. People like Moana, they actually can't see the North Star. It's true. They see something else. So we see constellations that they can't see in the northern hemisphere, and they actually see a few things that we can't see because the Earth is slightly tilted on its axis. So if we go look at a different location, let's say Australia, all right, so Australia is going to be in the southern hemisphere. Let's look at some of these constellations, right? A little different, some things that we aren't used to seeing down there. So everyone, if we look around, you will see right there, you can see Scorpio again. So again, this makes a lot of sense that we would see Scorpio, the scorpion, because this is higher in the sky here in the southern hemisphere. Again, this is what's drawing up the Hawaiian Islands where Moana lives. So we can see that we have similar constellations here, but they actually use something a little different. So they use something called crux. All right. Crux is what they call the Southern Cross. And I'm going to teach you how, if you are in the southern hemisphere, you would be able to find your direction. Again, you wouldn't be looking for the southern or the northern star. You're going to be looking for the southern point to look at. So crux right here, you might notice, these are very bright stars in the sky, and it forms this cross. Again, this is called the Southern Cross. So there's two very, very bright stars here, Gacrux and Acrux. All right, these are two very, very bright stars are what we are going to be looking at. Again, these are going to be called part of this Southern Cross constellation. And we are also going to be looking at some pointer stars. Again, pointer stars just like we had with the Big Dipper. Now, pointer stars are great because, again, very, very bright stars that you can find in the night sky. And if we're looking at Crux and the pointer stars, which are these two stars right here, I'm going to fast forward time a little bit so that they're a little easier to see. There we go. If we look at these stars right here, if we follow a line with these stars here straight down, and then we follow a line that starts at the midway point between these two stars and follow that all the way down, then the place that it's going to end is going to be your southern spot. So imagine you have a line here, imagine you have a line here, and lo and behold, that is going to line up to the south. So where they connect is the point where your southern star theoretically would be, and that is the point that you would use with your celestial navigation to figure out which way is south. So again, we have it a little bit easier in the north. It's a little bit more confusing here. But Australia, where we are right now, that's at about 20 degrees south. So again, if you took that line, you drew it down, you took this line, you drew it down, and it's going to connect right about here at that 20-degree line right here. So it works there too. Again, if you're ever lost out at sea now, if you are in the northern hemisphere, you can find the northern star, find your way north. If you're ever in the southern hemisphere lost out at sea, you can find the Southern Cross, those pointer stars, connect the dots, find your way south. And what can I say except you're welcome. So let's head back to New York. Another bad joke, I know. All right, so now we're back here in New York City. I want to show you one other thing, and that is that in addition to these ancient cultures, of course, noticing these constellation star groupings, they also noticed some other really big bright stars that rather than staying put or moving how they expected them to, they seem to be moving and wandering through the sky. So the ancient Greek named them for their word that meant wanderer, which was planetes. And just like it sounds, that's where we get the word for planet today. Now, you can actually see planets in our night sky too. So we can see Jupiter and Saturn here. I believe right now, actually, let's see, where is it? Right now in the night sky, if we look for the Cancer constellation, it might be under the horizon at the moment. Let's see if we can find that. Mars is currently in, there it is. Mars is right smack dab in the center of Cancer at this exact moment, which is kind of cool. Mars is a planet, of course, that we've seen quite a bit in the news. We landed our Perseverance rover on it. But Mars is really cool because it appears red in our night sky. It's this glowing red dot, right? And it got its name because, again, it's like this glowing red eye in the night sky. And the Roman god of war, his name was Mars. So that's what they thought would be a good name for it. Again, it's glowing red eye. Oop, lost it. But Mars is actually red because it is covered in iron oxide covering its surface. So again, as we zoom in here, we can see that layer of kind of rust all across the ground. But we currently have our Perseverance rover up there searching for signs of possible past life in an area called the Jezero Crater, which scientists believe might have at one time been an ancient river delta and lake. So there you go. We can see all sorts of fun things in the night sky. And you can also create your own pictures up there too. So if you ever are outside and you can see a bunch of stars, or even if you can only see a couple of stars, look up there and see what pictures you can create up there. See what else you can recognize. So, my friends, we have reached the end of our Star Stories program, but I would like to see if we have any last questions before we wrap up. Any last questions? Why do stars twinkle? Yeah, so stars, they often give off that flickering kind of twinkling movement a little bit. Oh, hey, someone should write a song about that, a twinkling little star. Hey, but that is actually light bending as it comes through the atmosphere, right? So as it comes through, it sort of slows down and it makes it look like they're twinkling from here on Earth. But actually, it's kind of an illusion to us. When we go out into space, the stars look a little different. They look a little more steady. So it's just kind of a special effect. It's an added bonus that we get from looking up at the stars from here on Earth. All right, any other questions? How many stars are in the universe? Oh, so in a nutshell, we don't know. Scientists are discovering new stars every day, but I did read once that there are at least 70, I want to say 70 sextillion stars. So that's a 7 with something like 22 zeros after it. So that's a lot. Now, of course, we cannot see all of them here on Earth. But I think that their number is probably closer to about 7,000 or 8,000 that we can see here. But there is, also this idea that if you took a grain, every grain of sand that is on every single beach here on Earth, so every tiny little, morsel, every little piece, and you counted them all up, there would still be more stars than even that. So that is a lot to wrap your head around for sure. So everyone, if you do have any other questions about our programs, feel free to reach out to us through our website, intrepidmuseum.org, or also through our social media. I would like to thank you so much for watching and sharing your thoughts and your comments today. And as you know, the museum hosts a number of live streams just like this, so please do follow and subscribe to this channel and visit our website for the latest streaming schedule. Also, if you enjoyed this or any of our past programs, we would love your feedback as well. So there is a link in the chat that I encourage you to click on to answer a few questions that'll help us to plan for our future programs. Now, our next program, speaking of which, our next family program is going to be Thursday at 3 p.m., and it is Astronaut Academy. So see if you've got the right stuff to become a NASA astronaut. We will be talking about how NASA picked the Mercury 7 and some of the wild simulations that they put them through to get them prepared for going into space. And then we'll also see how that all stacks up to the astronauts of today. So once again, that is Thursday at 3 p.m. right here on our streaming platforms. So once again, everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. Once again, now also the museum has reopened to the public 7 days a week from 10 to 5 p.m. So if you are in the area, we'd love for you to come by and say hello. Otherwise, we hope to see you online for another virtual Intrepid adventure. Thanks so much, everyone. We'll see you next time.